The firebase sat like a frozen scar on the mountain's face. Concrete bunkers, razor wire, and watchtowers built from necessity rather than comfort. The wind came down from the peaks in waves carrying snow that stung exposed skin and turned breath to ice before it left your lungs. This was the Balkans in winter, 1998, where NATO peacekeeping meant holding ground that nobody wanted and everybody fought over. The convoy rolled through the gate just before dusk. Three Humvees caked in mud and road salt, their engines ticking as they cooled. Soldiers climbed out stiff from the ride, stamping, feeling back into their feet, pulling gear from the beds with hands that moved slow in the cold. They had that look men get when they've been moving for days, when hot food and a rack become the only things that matter. Lieutenant Sienna Calloway was the last one out. She moved with economy, no wasted motion. Her eyes already scanning the perimeter the way a sniper learns to scan. 28 years old, medium height, lean in the way that comes from carrying weight over distance. Her face had sharp lines, a jaw that set hard when she was thinking, and eyes the color of winter sky. She wore her hair pulled back tight, practical, and her hands were steady as she reached into the vehicle. The rifle case came out wrapped in a canvas sleeve worn soft at the corners. She handled it the way some people handle family heirlooms, with care that spoke of value beyond money. When she slung it over her shoulder, the balance was automatic muscle memory from years of carry. A specialist nearby caught sight of the case and nudged his buddy. The grin started there and spread down the line like a spark finding dry tinder. Lieutenant bringing her hunting rifle? The question hung in the cold air. A few heads turned. Someone laughed short and sharp. Sienna didn't break stride. She pulled her duffel from the truck bed and started toward the barracks. But the talk followed her the way talk always does, in a unit where boredom makes entertainment out of anything different. Staff Sergeant Vance, a barrel-chested man with a face like weathered stone, stepped into her path. He wasn't hostile, just curious in that way sergeants get when they see something that doesn't fit the manual. That your primary weapon, Lieutenant? It is. New issue came in last month. M24A2S with the digital optics package. You get yours yet? I did. And I'm using this one. Vance's eyebrows went up. He glanced at the case, then back at her face, trying to read whether this was some kind of statement or just stubbornness. How old is that rifle, ma'am? 15 years. The number landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of disbelief moved through the men close enough to hear. 15 years in military time was ancient history. 15 years ago, the Soviet Union still existed. 15 years ago, half this equipment hadn't been invented yet. 15. Vance repeated it like he was testing the word. You're bringing a rifle older than some of these privates to a combat zone. I'm bringing a rifle that's never missed when I needed it to count. The new ones have thermal imaging, ballistic computers, auto-ranging. That thing doesn't even have, it has glass that doesn't fog, a trigger I know to the ounce, and a barrel that's still true because I've cleaned it after every mission for 9 years. The conviction in her voice stopped the conversation cold. Vance studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. He didn't argue. Men who'd been in long enough learned to recognize certainty when they heard it, even if they didn't agree with it. But as Sienna walked past, she heard the muttering start up again. Quiet enough for deniability, loud enough to make sure she heard. Museum piece. Antique roadshow. Girl's gonna get someone killed with that relic. She kept walking. Her spine stayed straight, her pace didn't change, but her jaw set a fraction harder. She'd heard it before. She'd hear it again. Respect wasn't given freely in this world. It was earned in increments, paid for with proof, and the bill always came due when the bullets started flying. The armory was a low building built into the hillside, half buried for protection from mortars. Inside, it smelled like gun oil and cold metal. Rifles lined the walls in racks, their barrels pointing down. Magazines separated and stacked in bins. Everything organized with military precision, everything labeled and inventoried. Master Sergeant Dutch Hargrove sat at the workbench under a pool of yellow light. 58 years old, built like a man who'd spent his life carrying weight and didn't complain about it. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his hands showed the scars of 3 decades working with tools and weapons. He wore reading glasses, low on his nose, squinting at a trigger assembly he was cleaning with a tiny brush. He didn't look up when the door opened. Didn't need to. He'd heard her walk, recognize the cadence. They give you hell yet. Sienna set the rifle case on the bench. Getting there. They see it. Enough to comment. Dutch grunted. He set down the trigger assembly and pulled the case toward him, unzipping it with fingers that moved with practiced care. The M24 rifle lay inside its stock, dark wood worn smooth, where her cheek had pressed it 10,000 times. The metal showed honest wear, not neglect. The scope mounted on top was older than the soldiers outside, but its lenses were clear, and the adjustment knobs turned with precision that came from maintenance, not luck. Dutch lifted it out of the case like he was greeting an old friend. He checked the bore with a penlight, ran his thumb along the stock's checkering, worked the bolt to feel the resistance. Barrel's still true, he said after a minute. Zero's tight, don't fix what ain't broke. That's what I told them. They don't believe you yet. No, they will. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the confidence of a man who'd seen this pattern play out before. Dutch set the rifle back in the case and looked at her over the top of his glasses. You remember when I gave you this Fort Benning, 1989? I was 19 and couldn't hit a stationary target at 300 yards without pulling left. You remember what I told you? That tools don't make shooters. Shooters make tools worth keeping. Dutch nodded slowly. You made this one worth keeping. Don't let anyone tell you different. The memory came back sharp and clear, despite the 9 years between. Fort Benning and summer heat that made the air shimmer over the range. Young Sienna Calloway, fresh out of basic hands, still soft ego, still intact. She'd been cocky then the way young soldiers are when they haven't learned the difference between confidence and competence. Dutch had been the range master, a gunnery sergeant with a reputation for breaking egos and building snipers. He'd watched her burn through a box of ammunition, missing more than she hit, blaming the rifle, the wind, the ammunition, everything except her own technique. Finally, he'd called a ceasefire and walked down to her position. He'd taken her rifle, checked it, and set it aside. Then he'd gone to the armory and come back with this M24. I am. The stock had been darker than the metal, less worn, but the character had already been there. Earned this in Grenada, he'd said, handing it to her. 83. Carried it through more sand and rain than you've seen in your life. Never failed me once. She'd taken it carefully, feeling the weight, the balance. It's yours if you master it, but you don't master it by blaming it. You master it by learning what it needs and giving it that every single time. No shortcuts, no excuses. You understand? She'd nodded, not really understanding, not yet. Yes, Sergeant. Then prove it. She'd spent the next 4 months proving it. Long days on the range in heat and rain. Night shoots when the targets were shadows and the only light came from stars. Dutch had been there for most of it, not teaching so much as observing, offering corrections when she earned them, staying silent when she needed to figure it out herself. By the end, she could put 5 rounds through the same hole at 300 yards. By the end, the rifle felt like an extension of her hands. By the end, Dutch had signed off on her qualification with a single sentence in his neat handwriting, she'll do. The rifle had been hers ever since. Through advanced infantry training, through Ranger School, where she'd been one of 3 women to make it through that year, through her first deployment to the Middle East, where she'd learned that shooting paper and shooting people required different kinds of steady. The rifle had been there for all of it. It had never jammed, never failed to fire, never lost its zero unless she'd purposely adjusted it. 15 years of service, and the only parts she'd replaced were springs and the occasional firing pin. Everything else was original, broken and known. Dutch's voice pulled her back to the present. Major Hastings been by yet? Not yet. He will be. He's got opinions about gear standardization. I've got opinions about trusting my life to equipment I haven't tested. You tell him that he'll order you to switch. Then I'll request a meeting with the CO. Dutch almost smiled. Almost. Stubborn. Learn from the best. This time he did smile, just a flicker at the corner of his mouth. He closed the rifle case and pushed it back toward her. Mission briefs at 0600. Get some rack time. You're gonna need it. Sienna picked up the case. What do you know that I don't? Same thing you know. Weather's turning bad. Comms have been spotty. And that helicopter that went down yesterday. He met her eyes. They're sending you to get the crew tomorrow. The weight of it settled on her shoulders. A rescue mission in winter mountains with a storm coming in. The kind of mission where everything that could go wrong usually did. How many on the crew? 3, pilot, co-pilot, gunner. Last transmission said they were alive, but the gunner was hurt. That was 18 hours ago. What's the opposition? Serbian paramilitaries in the area, maybe a dozen, maybe more. They know the terrain and they know we're coming. Sienna nodded slowly. This was the job. This was why they were here. But the knot in her gut tightened anyway, the way it always did before action. Get some sleep, Dutch said again. That rifle's ready. Just make sure you are. She left the armory and walked through the compound. The snow had started again, small flakes that drifted rather than fell. Soldiers moved between buildings, shadows in the gathering dark. Somewhere a generator rumbled. Somewhere else someone laughed at a joke she couldn't hear. The barracks was a long metal building with bunks stacked too high and personal space measured in arm's length. It smelled like wet wool and boot leather, and too many bodies in too small a space. She found an empty rack near the back, stowed her gear, and lay down with her boots still on. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did before a mission. Her mind ran through checklists, scenarios, contingencies. She thought about the helicopter crew waiting in the cold. She thought about the paramilitaries who'd be hunting them. She thought about the new rifles with their digital scopes and ballistic computers, and she thought about the simple mechanics of the weapon lying in the case beside her bunk. She must have dozed because the next thing she knew, someone was shaking her shoulder. She came awake fast, hand already moving toward her sidearm before she recognized the face. Staff Sergeant Vance stood over her bunk. "Major wants to see you now." She checked her watch. 0200 hours. 3 hours until the briefing. This wasn't about the briefing. Major Hastings's office was in the command building, a trailer that had been reinforced with sandbags and wishful thinking. In the that it was warm enough to fog windows, and the major sat behind a field desk covered in maps and reports. He was 45 career Army with the kind of face that looked permanent even when it smiled. He didn't smile now. "Lieutenant Calloway, sit." She sat. The rifle case was still in her hand. She hadn't left it in the barracks. Some instincts ran too deep to ignore. Hastings looked at the case, then at her. "I've been reviewing the roster for tomorrow's mission. Noticed you're not listed as carrying standard issue." "No, sir." "Care to explain why?" "I'm more effective with the weapon I've trained with, sir. The M24A2 is an upgrade. Better optics, better range finding, capability, better everything." "You're telling me you're more effective with a rifle that predates half the technology in that upgrade?" "I'm saying I know this rifle, sir. I know its tendencies, its limits, and its capabilities. I can make shots with it that I couldn't make with a weapon I've only fired on a qual range." Hastings leaned back in his chair. "This is about unit cohesion, Lieutenant. About standardization. If everyone's running the same gear, we can cross-load ammunition parts maintenance. You going rogue with vintage equipment puts that at risk. With respect, sir, my ammunition is standard 7.62 NATO, same as every other sniper rifle in inventory, and I maintain my own weapon." "That's not the point." "What is the point, sir?" The question came out harder than she'd intended. Hastings' jaw tightened. "The point is, I'm giving you a direct order to use standard issue equipment. Is that clear enough?" The silence stretched between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the trailer's metal walls. Sienna thought about 9 years with this rifle. 9 years of trigger time, of learning how it moved in wind, how it held zero in heat and cold, how the bullet drop matched the hash marks in her scope at every distance she'd ever needed. She thought about the helicopter crew waiting in the mountains. She thought about making a shot that mattered with a weapon she'd fired maybe 200 rounds through. "Sir, I respectfully request 48 hours to prove the rifle's effectiveness. If it fails in any way, I'll switch to standard issue immediately." "You don't get 48 hours, Lieutenant. You get tomorrow's mission, and you'll run it with the gear I specify." "Then I formally request to speak with the battalion commander about this decision." Hastings stood up. "You're pushing Calloway." "I'm trying to do my job with the tool that gives us the best chance of success. Your job is to follow orders. My job is to bring those crew members home alive, and I can do that better with this rifle than with any other weapon in the armory." They stared at each other across the desk. Finally, Hastings sat back down. He rubbed his eyes, and when he spoke again, the edge in his voice had dulled slightly. "You really believe that?" "Yes, sir, completely." He was quiet for a long moment, weighing options, weighing consequences. Finally, he sighed. 72 hours. You get 72 hours to prove it. But if that rifle causes one problem, one malfunction, one missed shot that matters, you're done. Clear." "Clear, sir." "Dismissed." She stood, started to leave, then stopped at the door. "Sir, thank you." Hastings waved her off. "Don't thank me yet. Just bring those people home." Outside, the snow had thickened. It came down steady now, building on the ground, on the wire, on the roofs. The kind of snow that changed terrain, that made distances deceptive and footing treacherous. The kind of snow that would make tomorrow's mission even harder than it already was. Sienna walked back to the barracks, slowly letting the cold air clear her head. She'd bought time, but time wasn't the same as trust. Trust had to be earned, and earning it meant making every shot count when the shooting started. The rest of the night passed in fragments. She cleaned the rifle, even though it didn't need cleaning, running the bore brush through until the patches came out white, oiling the bolt, checking the scope mounts for any hint of shift. It was ritual more than necessity, but the ritual mattered. It focused the mind, settled the nerves, created a sense of control in a situation where control was mostly illusion. At 0530, she reassembled the rifle, loaded a magazine, and chambered a round. The bolt slid home with a sound like precision machinery, which is exactly what it was. She set the safety and slipped the rifle back into its case. At 0545, soldiers started filing into the briefing room. They came in quiet, still half asleep, clutching coffee in paper cups that steamed in the cold air. Sienna took a seat near the back. A few heads turned when she walked in. The word had spread. Everyone knew about the old rifle. Everyone had an opinion. Major Hastings entered at exactly 600, followed by his staff. He moved to the front of the room where a map of the area had been tacked to a board. Red marks showed their position, the crash site, and the known or suspected locations of hostile armed forces. Listen up. At 14:30 yesterday, a UH-60 Black Hawk went down approximately 10 miles northeast of this position. He tapped the map. 3 crew aboard. Last transmission indicated they were alive, but the crew chief sustained injuries in the crash. Weather's kept us from getting air assets back in there, and it's only getting worse. He paused, looking around the room. That means we go in on foot. Lieutenant Calloway will lead the rescue element. Staff Sergeant Vance, you're her number 2. Team will be 8 personnel, total 2 medics, 4 riflemen, and Calloway as primary sniper. Master Sergeant Hargrove will remain on base as tactical advisor and coordinate any air support if the weather breaks. Sienna felt eyes on her. The pressure of expectation, of doubt, of wait and see, so she kept her face neutral, focused on the map, on the terrain, on the problem to be solved. Hastings continued. Route is marked here. We've got recent intel suggesting Serbian paramilitaries operating in this sector, strength unknown, but estimated at squad level or higher. They know the ground, and they're not friendly to NATO presence. Rules of engagement are standard weapons free if engaged, but we're here to rescue our people, not start a firefight. He looked directly at Sienna. Lieutenant, you'll move out at 0800. Weather window is closing fast. You've got maybe 36 hours before that whole valley becomes impassable. Questions? A hand went up. Corporal Mackenzie Young, eager, the kind of soldier who asked questions to show he was paying attention. Sir, what about the gear issue? The room went quiet. Hastings' jaw tightened. What gear issue, Corporal? The lieutenant's rifle, sir? I heard. You heard wrong. Lieutenant Calloway's weapon is her call. Anyone else got relevant questions? No hands went up. The message was clear. Hastings had made his decision. The rest of them could fall in line or shut up. Dismissed. Calloway, Vance, stay back. The room emptied fast. When it was just the 3 of them, Hastings crossed his arms. I've given you cover, Lieutenant. Don't make me regret it. I won't, sir. Vance, you good with this? The staff sergeant glanced at Sienna, then back at Hastings. I've got reservations, sir, but I'll follow the lieutenant's lead. Make sure the team does too. Last thing we need is internal friction on a mission this tight. Understood, sir. They left the briefing room together. Outside, the first light was starting to break over the mountains, turning the snow from black to gray. Vance stopped, looked at Sienna. You really trust that rifle? With my life? That's not what I asked. Do you trust it with theirs? He gestured toward the barracks where the rest of the team was getting ready. Sienna met his eyes. Yes, completely. Vance nodded slowly. Then I guess we'll find out if you're right. He walked away, leaving her standing in the snow. The firebase was waking up around her. Engines starting, voices calling, the mechanical rhythm of a military installation preparing for another day. But for Sienna, the next 36 hours would determine more than just another day. She headed to the armory one more time. Dutch was already there, had probably been there all night. He looked up when she entered. How'd it go with Hastings? He gave me 72 hours. That's more than I expected. He wants proof, so give it to him. Dutch stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a small scope. It was old, the housing scratched and dented, but the lenses were clean. Brought this back from Da Nang. Used it for spotting. It's yours if you want it. Sienna took it carefully. The metal was cold in her hands, but solid. Reliable. Like everything Dutch had ever given her. I thought you said no Vietnam. I said you don't need Vietnam stories. Didn't say I don't have Vietnam gear. He almost smiled. Besides, this scope doesn't care where it's been, only cares where it's going. She attached it to her belt. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just come back with those crew members. And Calloway. Yeah, that rifle's proven itself 100 times. Today it's your turn to prove you're still worthy of it. The words hit harder than she'd expected. She nodded, unable to find a response that matched the weight of what he'd said. At 07:45, the team assembled at the gate. 8 soldiers plus Sienna, everyone loaded, everyone quiet with the kind of quiet that comes before action. Vance did a final check of equipment, counting magazines, checking radios, making sure nothing critical was missing. Sienna stood apart, the rifle in her hands now no longer in the case. She'd loaded 6 magazines, 20 rounds each. 120 rounds total. More than she'd need if everything went right. Not nearly enough if everything went wrong. Corporal Hayes approached a kid from Texas with a drawl that made everything sound like a question. "Lieutenant, you really gonna run that old thing?" "I really am." "What if it jams?" "It won't." "How do you know?" She looked at him, saw the genuine concern in his face, the worry of a young soldier who didn't want to die because someone made a bad call. "Because I've fired this rifle in rain, snow, sand, and mud. I've fired it in heat that melted boot soles and cold that froze water in canteens. I've dropped it, dragged it, and beat it to hell and back. And it has never, not once, failed to fire when I pulled the trigger. That's how I know." Hayes thought about that, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." At 0800, the gate opened. The team moved out in a staggered column, spacing themselves for cover eyes scanning the tree line. The snow crunched under their boots, and their breath hung in clouds that dissolved slowly in the still air. Sienna took point with Vance at her shoulder. The rifle felt right in her hands, the weight distributed perfectly, the sling adjusted to exactly the tension she wanted. She'd made this walk 1,000 times in training, but training and real world had different prices for mistakes. They moved through the wire past the last defensive position into the forest beyond. The mountains rose ahead of them, white and silent, and waiting. Somewhere out there, 3 crew members huddled in the wreckage of their helicopter, hoping someone was coming. Somewhere out there, hostile forces moved through the same snow, looking for targets, looking for opportunities. And between them all, a woman with a 15-year-old rifle she trusted more than anything else in the world. The mission had begun. The forest swallowed them whole within the first 100 yards. Pine trees stood in tight ranks, their branches heavy with snow that filtered the morning light into a dim gray wash. The world became monochrome, all whites and blacks and shades between, the kind of landscape where depth perception played tricks and distances lied. Sienna moved with her rifle at low ready eyes, constantly sweeping left to right, high to low. The team spread out behind her in a tactical column, each soldier maintaining proper spacing, each one watching a different sector. This was the theory they'd trained on, the practice they drilled until it became reflex. But theory had a way of falling apart when the snow was real, and the cold bit through layers, and the weight on your back made every step cost more than the last. They'd been moving for 20 minutes when Vance came up beside her, his breath puffing white in the air. "What's your read on the terrain?" Sienna paused, studying the slope ahead. The ground rose steadily, not steep but relentless, the kind of grade that burned the legs and tested the lungs. Through the trees, she could see where the forest thinned near a ridgeline, a natural checkpoint where they could observe before committing to the descent on the other side. "We push to that ridge, take a position, scan the approach to the crash site. If it's clear, we move fast. If it's not, we find another route. And if we're already compromised, then we deal with it." Vance didn't look satisfied with the answer, but he didn't argue. He dropped back to check on the others, leaving Sienna to navigate the next stretch alone. The snow made everything harder. It filled in depressions, hit obstacles, turned simple, walking into constant calculation. Step wrong and you'd sink to your knee. Step right and you'd still sink to your ankle. The team moved slow by necessity, conserving energy, trying to keep sweat to a minimum, because sweat meant cooling, and cooling meant hypothermia, and hypothermia meant death. Fresh snow had begun falling again, light at first, but building steadily. The weather window Hastings had promised was closing faster than predicted. Sienna felt the rifle's weight with every step. 15 pounds of wood and metal, plus the magazines, plus the scope Dutch had given her. It wasn't excessive, but it accumulated. Her shoulders registered the load, her back compensated, her legs adjusted their rhythm. They reached the ridgeline 40 minutes into the movement. Sienna signaled a halt, and the team took knee weapons oriented outward, creating a defensive perimeter by instinct. She moved to the edge where the trees broke and the ground dropped away into a narrow valley. Below, maybe a mile distant, she could see the black scar of the crash site. The helicopter had come down hard, carving a path through the forest before slamming into a cluster of rocks. Parts of the airframe were scattered across a 100-yard debris field. No smoke, which meant the fire had burned out or never started. No movement that she could see, which meant nothing. She pulled out the spotting scope Dutch had given her and glassed the area methodically, the wreckage first, looking for any sign of the crew. The tree line next searching for footprints, disturbances, anything that suggested hostile presence. The approach routes after that, identifying the paths someone would take to reach the site, the positions someone would use to observe it. The scope's optics were old but still sharp. She could make out details, the way metal had twisted on impact, the way snow had drifted against the fuselage. But she couldn't see the crew. They were either inside the wreckage taking shelter from the cold, or they'd moved to a different location. Or they were already gone, taken, or killed, and this whole mission was recovery rather than rescue. Vance crawled up beside her. See anything? Wreckage is there, no visible activity. Could be buttoned up inside, could be somewhere else. What about hostiles? No tracks I can see from here, but that doesn't mean much. Snow's been falling all night, could have covered them. Vance took his own look through binoculars, scanning the same ground she'd just covered. After a minute, he lowered them. Don't like it. Too quiet. Quiet's better than loud. Quiet's when they're waiting. Sienna couldn't argue with that. She'd seen enough ambushes to know they always started with silence. The enemy picked their ground, set their positions, and waited for targets to walk into the kill zone. If Serbian paramilitaries were in the area, this crash site was exactly the kind of bait that would draw them. She pulled back from the edge and gathered the team. They formed a tight circle, keeping voices low, minimizing exposure. Crash site is a mile northeast. Direct approach takes us down this slope through open ground for about 300 yards, then back into tree cover. It's exposed, but it's fast. Alternate route would take us around the valley edge, longer, but more concealment. Corporal Hayes spoke up. What's your call, Lieutenant? Sienna considered. Time was against them. The longer those crew members stayed in the cold, the worse their condition would be. But walking into an ambush would help no one. We take the direct route, but we do it smart. I'll move ahead with Hayes as my spotter. Rest of you hold this position and provide overwatch. We confirm the site is secure, then signal you forward. Questions? What if it's not secure? This from Private Davis, a quiet rifleman who rarely spoke but asked good questions when he did. Then you'll hear shooting and you move to support. But we don't all walk into the same trap. Vance nodded approval. I'll coordinate from here. You need anything, you call it. Roger that. Sienna checked her rifle one more time. Bolt smooth, safety off, magazine seated. Hayes did the same with his M4, his young face set in concentration. He was 22 on his first real deployment and trying hard not to show how scared he was. She recognized the look because she'd worn it herself once. Stay close, watch our flanks, and if I tell you to get down, you drop like gravity doubled. Clear, team. Clear, ma'am. They moved out, leaving the ridgeline behind, starting the descent into the valley. The slope was treacherous, snow over ice over rock, and twice Sienna had to catch herself on tree trunks to keep from sliding. Hayes followed in her footsteps, literally using the path she broke to make his own movement easier. The forest thinned as they descended. More light penetrated here, which meant better visibility, but also meant they were more visible. Sienna slowed her pace, moving from cover to cover, using trees and rocks to break her silhouette. The rifle stayed ready, her finger resting on the trigger guard, ready to drop to the trigger itself at the first sign of threat. They were halfway across the open ground when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not an animal, not the natural creak and shift of a winter forest. This was mechanical, deliberate. The metallic click of a weapon being readied. Sienna froze. Hayes froze behind her, reading her body language, understanding without words that something was wrong. They stayed motionless for 10 seconds, 20, listening with every nerve. There, again. To the left, maybe 50 yards hidden in the tree line. She used hand signals. Enemy. Left. Wait. Hayes acknowledged. His breathing had changed faster now, adrenaline kicking in. She needed him steady. She needed him thinking, not panicking. The sound came a third time, and this time she placed it. A rifle bolt being worked, someone clearing a chamber or loading a round, someone getting ready. She raised her own rifle slowly, bringing the scope to her eye. The world narrowed to the circle of glass, to the magnified view of snow and trees and shadows. She swept across the area where the sound had originated, looking for movement, for shape, for anything that resolved into human form. Nothing. Just forest. Just stillness. But the wrongness remained. Her instincts screamed that they were being watched, that somewhere in that tree line, someone had them in their sights. She made a decision. Better to break contact now than walk deeper into a trap. She signaled Hayes, fall back. Slow. They retreated step by careful step, maintaining their facing weapons oriented toward the threat they couldn't see. Sienna's heart hammered, but her hands stayed steady. This was training. This was discipline. This was the accumulation of every hour she'd spent learning to function while afraid. They were 10 yards from the tree line when the first shot cracked. The bullet hit a tree to Sienna's right, spraying bark and snow. The report echoed off the valley walls, flat and sharp. She dropped to a knee, rifle already tracking toward the muzzle flash she'd seen in her peripheral vision. There, a figure in winter camouflage partially concealed behind a fallen log. The rifle coming up for a second shot. Sienna's scope found him. Distance 350 yards. Wind left to right, maybe 5 miles per hour. Elevation shooting downhill, adjust accordingly. All of this processed in the half-second between seeing the target and making the decision to fire. The 15-year-old rifle spoke. The recoil pressed into her shoulder, familiar, expected. Through the scope, she saw the target drop, saw the rifle fall from his hands. "Moving!" Hayes shouted, already shifting position, laying down, suppressing fire with his M4. 3-round bursts controlled, giving her time to displace. More shots answered from the tree line, not one shooter, multiple. The ambush she'd feared sprung early because they'd been cautious enough to make the enemy nervous. Sienna ran in a crouch, making for a cluster of rocks that would provide hard cover. Bullets kicked up snow around her feet. She slid behind the rocks and immediately brought the rifle up, scanning for targets. There, second shooter moving between trees trying to flank. She led him by half a body length, accounting for his movement and the bullet's travel time. The trigger broke clean. The target went down. Hayes reached the rocks, breathing hard. "Jesus, how many are there?" "Too many. Call it in. We need support." He keyed his radio, shouting over the gunfire. Contact, grid reference." He rattled off coordinates while Sienna provided covering fire, shooting at muzzle flashes at shapes that resolved briefly before disappearing behind cover. Vance's voice came back through the static. "Roger, moving to support. Hold position." But holding position was getting harder. The enemy was spreading out, trying to envelop them. Professional tactics, professional movement. These weren't militia fighters. These were trained soldiers who knew what they were doing. Sienna fired again. Third target down. The bolt cycled smoothly despite the cold. Ejected brass arced through the air, landing in the snow with a soft hiss. She chambered the next round, acquired the next target, made the next decision. Fourth shot, fourth target. This one at 400 yards, partially concealed. She aimed for center mass, the largest target area, and let her training take over. The rifle punched her shoulder. The target dropped. "They're pulling back," Hayes called out. He was right. The incoming fire had slackened. The enemy was repositioning, maybe regrouping, maybe retreating. Sienna didn't trust it. Ambushes had phases. This might be the pause before a more coordinated assault. Movement on the ridge. Vance and the rest of the team moving fast, using the same route she and Hayes had taken. They reached the rocks in under 2 minutes, sliding into position, adding their weapons to the defense. Vance took in the situation at a glance. "Report. 4 hostiles down, unknown number displaced. They were set up on the crash site waiting. Crew status. Unknown. Haven't reached the site yet." More gunfire erupted, this time from a different angle. The enemy had flanked while the team was consolidating. Rounds impacted the rocks, winding off into the distance. Someone screamed. Sienna turned and saw Private Davis on the ground, blood spreading across his leg. The medics moved immediately, dragging him behind cover, working to stop the bleeding. Sienna's mind calculated the new reality. 1 man down, enemy with superior position, mission objective still not secured. She looked at Vance. "We can't stay here. They'll maneuver on us until we're surrounded." "Where do we go?" "Forward, into the crash site. Use the wreckage for cover, force them to come to us on our terms." It was a desperate move, but staying here was just slow death. Vance saw it too. He nodded. "Suppressing fire on my mark. We bound forward in pairs. Davis stays here with Ramirez." He looked at the medic. "You keep him alive." Ramirez nodded, his hands already working. Pressure dressing being applied, morphine being administered. 3, 2, 1 mark. The team opened up, every weapon firing, laying down a wall of lead that forced the enemy to take cover. Sienna and Hayes broke from the rocks, running low, making for the next position. She counted steps, counted seconds, waiting for the inevitable moment when the enemy fire resumed. It came sooner than she'd hoped. Bullets cracked past her head. She dove behind a tree trunk, the impact jarring her shoulder. Hayes landed beside her, gasping. "Next bound," Vance shouted. 2 more soldiers broke from the rocks, running the same gauntlet. One made it. The other went down hard, clutching his arm. The medics were moving again, risking exposure to reach him. This was falling apart. The enemy had them pinned, hurt, bleeding. Every second they stayed exposed was another chance for someone to die. Sienna made a decision. She moved from behind the tree, finding an exposed position with a clear view of the enemy's likely locations. It was stupid, it was dangerous, but it was necessary. She brought the rifle up and started shooting with a methodical precision. Not spray and pray, not suppressing fire. Aimed shots, deliberate kills. She spotted a target and fired. The action cycled. Spotted another and fired. Worked the bolt. The rhythm became automatic, the old rifle an extension of her will. Fifth kill. Sixth kill. The enemy fire slackened as they realized someone was picking them off with precision they couldn't match. "Move," she shouted to the team. "I'll cover." They didn't hesitate. Vance led the bound forward, dragging the wounded with them, making for the crash site that was now less than 100 yards away. Sienna stayed in position, scanning for targets, ready to fire on anything that moved. She saw one more, a figure breaking from cover trying to reposition. 700 yards, difficult shot, moving target. She led him by 2 body lengths, adjusted for the downhill angle, and fired. The target stumbled and went down. 7th kill. She reloaded, seating a fresh magazine. The entire evolution took 3 seconds. Muscle memory executed under stress. She was back in the scope before the enemy could capitalize on the pause. "Sienna, displace," Vance's voice urgent. She broke from the position, running full sprint toward the wreckage. Bullets followed her, snapping through the air, but she kept moving, kept her feet under her, trusted her legs to find solid ground, even when she couldn't see where she was stepping. She crashed into the wreckage perimeter and rolled behind a section of twisted fuselage. The team was already there, formed up in a hasty defensive position, weapons oriented outward. The 2 wounded were being treated against the inner wall of the helicopter's remains. And there, huddled in what had been the crew compartment, she saw them. The helicopter crew, all 3 alive, watching the firefight with wide eyes. The pilot spoke first, his voice hoarse. "You picked one hell of a time to show up." Sienna didn't smile. "You picked one hell of a place to crash." Vance was already on the radio, calling for extraction, giving updated coordinates, requesting air support if the weather allowed. The response was crackly but clear enough. Negative on air support. Weather had socked in the valley. They were on their own. "How far to friendly lines?" the co-pilot asked. "1.5 miles, uphill, through a forest full of people trying to kill us." "That's not very encouraging." "It's not meant to be. Can you walk?" The pilot nodded. The co-pilot looked shaky but managed to stand. The crew chief was worse off, his leg, clearly broken, his face pale from shock and pain. He'd need to be carried. The enemy fire had stopped, which meant they were regrouping. Sienna knew the pattern. They'd reposition, bring up more fighters if they had them, and hit the crash site with everything they had. The wreckage provided good cover, but it was a fixed position. Fixed positions became graves. She moved to where Vance was coordinating the defense. "We need to move before they get organized." "Davis can't walk. Garza's got a through and through on his arm. The crew chief needs a litter. We're not exactly mobile." "Then we make a stand here and hope we have enough ammunition." "How much you got left?" Sienna checked her magazines. 4 full, 1 partial. Maybe 80 rounds. Burned through 40 already. "I've got maybe 100 between all of us. That's not enough if they come heavy." He was right. The math was simple and brutal. They were outnumbered, outpositioned, and running low on everything that mattered. But they still had one advantage. Sienna had proven the rifle worked. She'd made 7 shots and 7 kills. The enemy knew someone was dropping them with precision they couldn't counter. "Put me on the high ground, that ridge there." She pointed to a rocky outcrop 30 yards from the wreckage. "I can cover the most likely approaches. The rest of you prepare the wounded for movement. When I thin them out enough, we run." Vance looked at her like she was crazy. "That's a suicide position. You'll be exposed from 3 sides. I'll be effective from 3 sides. Trust me." The word trust hung between them. He'd had his doubts about the rifle, about her judgment, but 7 dead enemies had changed the equation. He'd seen what she could do. "How long do you need?" "Give me 10 minutes. If I'm still shooting, after that start moving. I'll catch up. And if you don't catch up, then you make sure those crew members get home." Vance stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. 10 minutes. "Don't make me regret this." Sienna grabbed extra magazines from Hayes, stuffing them into her pockets. She checked the rifle one more time, clearing snow from the action, making sure nothing would impede its function. Then she moved toward the ridge, low and fast, using every scrap of cover the terrain offered. The position was exactly as bad as Vance had said. Exposed, vulnerable, a perfect target once the enemy identified it. But it also had clear sight lines across the approaches to the crash site. From here, she could see everything. She set up the rifle on a small rock, creating a stable rest. The old scope, Dutch's scope, went on her belt within easy reach. She'd use it to spot targets, then switch to the rifle scope to engage. It was slower than having a dedicated spotter, but she'd trained for this, worked through the drills until the transition became automatic. The forest had gone quiet again. No gunfire, no movement, just the wind and the snow and the waiting. Sienna settled into the position, body transitioning from movement to stillness. This was the mental shift every sniper learned to make. The body wanted to stay revved, wanted to maintain the adrenaline high. But precision shooting required calm, required the discipline to override instinct. She scanned the tree line with the spotting scope, looking for the signs she'd been trained to recognize. Unnatural shapes, movement against the pattern, the glint of metal or glass. Nothing yet, but they were out there. Regrouping, planning, preparing to finish what they'd started. The first one appeared at the tree line, moving cautiously, trying to use cover. Sienna tracked him through the spotting scope, judged his route, his pace. Then she switched to the rifle scope and waited for him to move into the open. He did. A 3-second window between trees. She put the crosshairs on his chest and fired. 8th kill. The shot rolled across the valley like thunder. Every enemy within earshot now knew exactly where she was. It was the price of the position, the cost of effectiveness. 2 more appeared, rushing across an open patch, trying to reach better cover. She cycled the action, acquired the first target, fired. The bolt slid home. Second target fired. 9th and 10th kills. The rifle was warm now. Despite the cold, the barrel heated from repeated firing. She could feel it through her gloves, a reassuring warmth that meant the weapon was doing its job. No jams, no failures, just reliable mechanical action that turned intent into impact. More targets. They were coming in groups now, trying to overwhelm her ability to engage. She picked the most dangerous first, the ones carrying heavier weapons, the ones who looked like leaders. Each shot was a calculation, a judgment call about who posed the greatest threat. 11th kill, 12th kill. Behind her, she could hear the team moving, preparing the wounded for transport. She didn't turn to look. Her job was here, keeping the enemy's attention, making them focus on her instead of the crash site. A bullet cracked past her head, close enough to feel the displacement of air. They'd found her range. Return fire started impacting around her position. Bullets striking rock, kicking up snow. She ignored it, stayed focused on her scope on the next target. 13th kill. Her magazine ran dry. She dropped it, seated a fresh one, chambered a round. The entire evolution took 3 seconds, muscle memory executed under stress. She was back in the scope before the enemy could capitalize on the pause. Movement to her left. A flanking element trying to come up the ridge. They were learning, adapting, using the tactics she'd forced them to employ. She shifted her position slightly, bringing the rifle to bear on the new threat. 2 targets moving in bounds. She took the lead man first, then the trailing man before he could react. 14th and 15th kills. The bolt was getting stiff friction from sustained firing, creating resistance. But it still worked, still cycled, still did what 15 years of proven reliability had promised it would do. Sienna. Vance's voice distant but urgent. We're moving 30 seconds. She acknowledged with a wave, didn't risk shouting back. The enemy was close now, close enough that noise discipline mattered. She had maybe 2 more shots before she'd need to displace or risk being overrun. She made them count. A target at 600 yards moving toward the crash site. She let him fired, watched him drop. 16th kill. 1 more. The last clear target before she'd need to run. A figure directing others, pointing, coordinating. Leadership. She put the crosshairs on him and fired. 17th kill. Then she was up and moving, grabbing the rifle, then slinging it across her back, running in a crouch toward the team's position. Bullets chased her, tearing through the air impacting all around. One tugged at her jacket so close she felt the heat of its passage. She dove behind the wreckage and rolled to her feet. The team was already gone, bounding up the slope, carrying the wounded, moving with desperate speed. She fell in at the rear, providing rear guard, her rifle ready for any pursuit. The enemy fire intensified, but it was wild, now uncoordinated. They'd lost too many leaders, taken too many casualties. The precision was gone, replaced by anger and frustration. Sienna ran her legs, burning her lungs, screaming for air. The rifle's weight pulled at her shoulders, but she didn't care. It had performed. Every shot fired, every target engaged. No malfunctions, no failures. Just consistent, reliable function under the worst conditions. They reached the tree line and the forest swallowed them again. The enemy fire faded, distance and terrain breaking the contact. The team kept moving, putting yards between themselves and the kill zone, driven by adrenaline and the primal need to survive. It was only when they'd reached the ridgeline and collapsed behind cover that Sienna finally let herself check the rifle. She worked the bolt, checking for damage for any sign that the sustained firing had compromised its function. The bolt moved smooth. The barrel showed no cracks. The scope held zero. The 15-year-old rifle had taken everything she'd asked of it and delivered without complaint. Vance crawled over, his face streaked with sweat and grime despite the cold. 17. I counted 17 kills. 17 confirmed. Could be more I didn't see drop. With that rifle. With this rifle. He shook his head slowly, something between admiration and disbelief crossing his face. I owe you an apology, Lieutenant. I dismissed your warning back at the firebase. That first scout who got hit, if I'd listened to you, maybe he'd still be breathing. We all make calls, Vance. You made the best one you could with what you knew. But you knew better. Your instincts, your experience. He paused. Won't happen again. Next time you say you hear something, I'm listening. It wasn't just an apology. It was a commitment to trust earned through action. They rested for 5 minutes, no more. The enemy might pursue, might bring reinforcements. Every second counted. The medics worked on the wounded, stabilizing, preparing them for the final push to friendly lines. Sienna redistributed her remaining ammunition. Maybe 40 rounds left, spread across 2 magazines. She'd burned through 80 rounds holding that position. Some shots missed, some suppressing fire, most finding their marks. Enough for emergencies, not enough for another sustained fight. But they were closer to safety now. The firebase was less than a mile away. She looked at the rifle one more time, this weapon that everyone had mocked, that everyone had dismissed as obsolete. It lay across her lap, metal and wood, simple mechanics proven over 15 years and 17 kills. Dutch had been right. Tools don't make shooters. Shooters make tools worth keeping. And she had proven beyond any doubt that some tools earn their place not through innovation, but through reliability tested under fire. The team stood prepared to move. Sienna took point again, the rifle ready, her eyes scanning the forest ahead. They still had distance to cover, still had dangers to face, but now, when the soldiers looked at her old rifle, they saw it differently. Not as a museum piece, not as an antique. They saw it as the weapon that had kept them alive. The final mile felt longer than all the distance they'd covered before. Uphill through deepening snow legs, heavy with exhaustion, lungs burning in the thin, cold air. The team moved in silence, broken only by labored breathing and the crunch of boots breaking through ice crust. Every soldier carried extra weight, now redistributing gear from the wounded, sharing the burden, because that's what you did when someone couldn't carry their own load anymore. Sienna maintained point position, rifle up, eyes never resting. The enemy had gone quiet after the engagement at the crash site, but quiet didn't mean gone. It meant waiting, watching, choosing their moment. She'd learned that lesson too many times to trust silence. Private Davis was on a makeshift litter, 2 soldiers rotating the carry every 100 yards. His leg was stabilized, the bleeding stopped, but his face had gone the color of old snow. Shock was setting in despite the morphine, despite the medic's best efforts. He needed real medical care, needed it soon, or the wound that hadn't killed him immediately would finish the job slowly. Corporal Bagarza walked on his own, but his left arm hung useless, the through-and-through gunshot wound bandaged tight to his chest. He tried to carry his rifle right-handed, but Vance had taken it from him, told him to focus on staying upright and moving forward. Pride had flashed across Garza's face, then pragmatism. He'd nodded and kept walking. The helicopter crew stayed in the middle of the formation, protected on all sides. The pilot and co-pilot moved under their own power, exhausted but functional. The crew chief was another story. His broken leg made every step agony, despite the splint, despite the painkillers. 2 soldiers supported him, arms under his shoulders, essentially carrying him between them. They'd been moving for 30 minutes when Sienna heard it again. That sound that didn't belong, that whisper of wrongness that set her nerves on edge. She raised a fist, and the column halted immediately, everyone dropping to a knee, weapons oriented outward. Vance moved up beside her. What have you got? Not sure. Something's tracking us. Left flank, maybe 200 yards out. You see it or feel it? Feel it. He didn't dismiss the concern. After 17 confirmed kills, after watching her call threats that others had missed, he'd learned to trust her instincts. He signaled 2 soldiers to cover the left side, reinforcing that sector. They waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing moved in the forest except wind-driven snow. But the feeling persisted, that crawling certainty that they were being observed, that somewhere in those trees eyes watched and hands gripped weapons. Sienna brought up the spotting scope, the old Vietnam-era glass that Dutch had given her. She scanned slowly, looking for the details that separated threat from terrain. A shape too regular, a shadow too deep, movement against the natural pattern. There. a figure in winter camouflage partially concealed behind a tree trunk, watching their position through binoculars. Not shooting, not advancing, just observing. She showed Vance. He looked, saw what she saw, processed the implications. Spotter, calling in our position. Means more are coming. How long do we have? Sienna considered. If the enemy was being smart, they'd position a blocking force ahead while the pursuit element pushed from behind. Classic hammer and anvil. The firebase was less than a mile away, but a mile could be forever if you had to fight through a prepared defense. We need to move faster, push through before they can set up. The wounded can't move faster. Then we carry them faster. Vance didn't like it, but he saw the logic. They couldn't fight another sustained engagement, not with their ammunition running low, not with multiple casualties who couldn't shoot back. Their only advantage was momentum, the ability to keep moving while the enemy repositioned. Double time, he ordered. Anyone who can't keep up gets carried. No one gets left behind. The team responded immediately. Fresh soldiers took over the litters, others distributed ammunition and equipment to balance the loads. The formation tightened, spacing compressed for speed rather than dispersed for security. It was a calculated risk, trading protection for pace. They moved out at nearly a run as fast as the terrain and the wounded allowed. Sienna led the way, picking the easiest path, avoiding obstacles that would slow them down. Behind her, she could hear the ragged breathing, the grunts of effort as soldiers pushed their bodies past comfortable limits into the zone where willpower mattered more than conditioning. The forest began to thin. They were getting close to the firebase's outer perimeter, close to the cleared ground where fields of fire had been cut to prevent exactly the kind of approach they were making. That cleared ground would be visible from the watchtowers, would be covered by defensive positions. Once they reached it, they'd have support, but they had to reach it first. The ambush came from ahead, not behind. 3 enemy fighters stepped out from cover positions, rifles already raised, already firing. They'd moved fast, set up in the most obvious choke point, and waited for the Americans to walk into it. The first burst caught one of the litter bearers. He went down hard, dropping his end of the litter, sending Davis spilling into the snow. The second burst went wide, chipping bark from trees. The third burst hit Garza in the chest. He dropped without a sound. Sienna was already moving rifle, coming up scope, finding targets. The range was close, barely 100 yards, almost too close for a scoped rifle designed for distance. But the fundamentals didn't change. Breathe, aim, fire. The first enemy fighter dropped. She cycled the action, acquired, the second fired. He dropped too. The third realized what was happening and tried to find cover. She led him by half a step and fired. He stumbled and fell. 18, 19, 20 kills. But the damage was done. Garza lay still in the snow, blood spreading from beneath him. Davis was conscious but disoriented. His wounded leg twisted at a bad angle from the fall. The team's momentum had broken their formation, scattered. "Medic," someone shouted. Ramirez was already moving, already assessing, already making the brutal calculations that combat medics learned to make. Garza first because Garza was dying right now. Davis second because Davis could wait another minute. Vance organized the perimeter, putting soldiers in position to repel any follow-up attack. Sienna maintained her position at the front, scanning for more threats, ready to engage anything that moved. Ramirez worked on Garza for 2 minutes before sitting back, his face grim. He looked at Vance and shook his head once. The meaning was clear. Garza was gone. The weight of it settled over the team like a physical thing. They'd been hit at the crash site, they'd taken casualties, but everyone had been alive when they started the movement back. Now they'd lost one. The mission had claimed its price. Sienna looked at Garza's still form, at the snow already beginning to cover him. He'd been 24, from Nevada, talked about opening a motorcycle shop when he got out. Now he'd never get out, never go home, never see that dream turn real. "We'll come back for him," Vance said quietly. "When it's safe, we'll bring him home." It was a promise they'd keep or die trying. You didn't leave your dead behind, not if there was any way to avoid it. Vance's voice cut through the shock. "We grieve later. Right now we move." Ramirez stabilized Davis again. "Everyone else, security positions. We're not stopping here." It was the right call, the only call. Staying meant dying. The enemy knew where they were, knew they were hurt and slowing. Every second of delay gave the enemy time to bring up more fighters to set up more ambushes. They left Garza where he fell. There was no choice. Carrying a dead man would slow them further, would risk more lives. Ramirez closed Garza's eyes, whispered something. Sienna couldn't hear, then stood and rejoined the formation. It was brutal, it was necessary, and it would haunt them later. The team moved out again faster now, despite the losses driven by the knowledge that stopping meant joining Garza in the snow. Sienna pushed the pace, her own exhaustion forgotten. Her focus narrowed to the single objective of reaching friendly lines. The forest opened up ahead. She could see the cleared ground now. The stumps where trees had been cut away, the wire obstacles marking the firebase's outer boundary. 200 yards. That's all that separated them from safety. But 200 yards of open ground with no cover, no concealment, completely exposed to fire from the tree line they were leaving and the positions they were approaching. If the towers didn't recognize them, if someone got trigger happy, the firebase's own defenses would cut them down. Vance came up beside her, breathing hard. I'll call it in, give them our position, and tell them we're coming in hot. He keyed his radio. Firebase Alpha, this is Rescue 1. We are 200 yards south of perimeter wire moving to your position. Multiple wounded, 1 KIA. Do not fire, I say again, do not fire. Acknowledge. Static. Then a voice crackling, but clear. Rescue 1, this is Firebase Alpha. We copy. Hold position for authentication. Negative on hold position. We are under pursuit. Need immediate entry. Rescue 1, you know the protocol. Authentication code required. Vance cursed under his breath. Procedures were procedures, even when lives hung in the balance. He rattled off a series of numbers and letters, the daily authentication that proved they were friendly forces and not an enemy trick. Seconds passed. Sienna scanned the tree line behind them, expecting to see enemy fighters emerging, expecting the final assault that would trap them in the open. Rescue 1 authentication confirmed. You are cleared to approach. Gate will be open. Medic standing by. Roger that. Moving now. The team broke from the trees at a dead run. The litter bearers struggled to keep Davis stable while maintaining speed. The helicopter crew stumbled forward on adrenaline and willpower. Sienna ran backward, rifle up, covering their retreat, ready to engage any pursuit. She saw them then. Enemy fighters at the tree line, at least a dozen, maybe more. They emerged from cover and opened fire, bullets kicking up snow around the running Americans. But they didn't advance into the open ground. They knew what waited in those watchtowers, knew that crossing into the cleared zone meant facing machine gun fire from prepared positions. One of the tower guns opened up anyway. Heavy caliber rounds tearing through the air over the team's heads, impacting the tree line with devastating effect. The enemy fire stopped immediately as they dove for cover. The American firebase was showing what happened when you threaten their people. Sienna turned and ran forward again, her lungs screaming, her legs burning. The gate was ahead, the wire pulled back, soldiers waiting to receive them. 50 yards, 40, 30. They crossed the wire and the gate swung shut behind them. But safety was temporary. The radio crackled with urgent traffic before the medics could even reach the casualties. All personnel, this is Firebase Command. Medical evacuation helicopter inbound, ETA, 8 minutes. We need the external LZ secured immediately. Vance looked at Hastings, who'd come running from the command post. Sir, that LZ is 200 yards outside the wire. The enemy has direct observation on it. I'm aware, Staff Sergeant, but Davis and the crew chief won't survive the hour without surgical intervention. That bird is their only chance. Sienna stepped forward, still catching her breath. I can cover it, sir. From the tower. Clear sight lines to the LZ and the tree line. Hastings studied her for a long moment. She was covered in grime and cordite residue, her uniform torn in places, her face drawn with exhaustion. But her eyes were steady. Her hands didn't shake, and the rifle in her grip looked like it belonged there. How many rounds you have left, Lieutenant? 38, sir. Enough. It'll have to be. He looked at Vance. Get her up there. Everyone else defensive positions along the wire. If they try to rush that LZ, we light them up. Sienna didn't wait. She grabbed 2 spare magazines from a supply crate and headed for the tallest observation tower, the one that dominated the approaches to the firebase. Her legs protested every rung of the ladder muscles, screaming from the abuse of the last 6 hours. But she climbed anyway, driven by the knowledge that Davis and the crew chief were counting on her. The tower platform was small, barely 8 feet square, open to the wind on all sides. But the view was perfect. She could see the landing zone clearly, a flat area marked with infrared strobes that would guide the helicopter in. Beyond it, the tree line where the enemy had taken cover. And they're moving in the shadow shapes that told her they hadn't given up. She set up the rifle on the tower's railing, creating a stable rest. The wind was stronger up here, gusting unpredictably, but she'd made harder shots. She checked the scope one more time, confirming 0, then settled in to wait. The helicopter appeared as a distant speck, growing larger, the distinctive whop-whop of rotor blades carrying across the valley. The enemy would hear it too, would know that their window to disrupt the evacuation was closing fast. Movement in the tree line. Sienna tracked it through her scope, identifying the threat. An enemy sniper setting up in an elevated position with a clear view of the LZ. Professional setup, professional discipline. He was building a hide, taking his time preparing for the shot that would bring down the helicopter or kill the crew loading casualties. Their eyes met through their respective scopes. A moment of recognition between professionals, each understanding what the other was about to attempt. Then the moment passed and calculation took over. Range 870 yards. Wind gusting left to right 8 to 12 miles per hour. Elevation shooting slightly downhill. Target partially concealed, only head and shoulders visible. This was the hardest shot of the day, maybe the hardest shot she'd ever attempted. But Davis was dying and the crew chief wasn't far behind, and that helicopter would be on the ground in less than 2 minutes. Sienna controlled her breathing. Let the wind gust, felt it push against her body, waited for the lull. When it came, she took up the slack in the trigger, found that perfect break point, and squeezed. The rifle spoke. Through the scope, she saw the enemy sniper's head snap back, saw him collapse behind his position. 21 kills. But there were more. 2 fighters broke from the tree line, running toward the LZ with RPGs on their shoulders. They'd try to reach firing position while the helicopter was most vulnerable during the landing when it couldn't maneuver. Sienna cycled the action brass, ejecting in a glittering arc. First target. Lead him account for his speed, his changing angle. Fire. He went down at 640 yards, the RPG tumbling from his hands. 22. Second target. Faster now, he'd seen his partner fall and was running erratically, trying to make himself harder to hit. But erratic movement followed patterns if you watched long enough. Sienna waited for the moment when his path straightened, when physics and momentum would force him into predictability. There. She led him by 3 body lengths and fired. 23 kills. The helicopter was on final approach now, nose-high bleeding, speed, the pilot fighting the wind to keep it stable. Sienna kept her scope on the tree line, ready to engage anything else that moved. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her cheek was raw from pressing against the stock, but her focus never wavered. The Black Hawk touched down in a storm of rotor wash and blowing snow. The crew worked with practiced efficiency, loading Davis first, then the crew chief securing them for transport, while the helicopter's guns covered the tree line. 45 seconds from touchdown to liftoff, a textbook evolution that spoke of training and discipline. The helicopter lifted off, banked hard left to put the firebase between it and the enemy position, and disappeared into the gray sky. The enemy fire that Sienna had been expecting never came. They'd lost too many trying to stop what couldn't be stopped. She descended the tower, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Vance met her at the bottom, his face showing something she'd never seen there before. Not just respect, gratitude. That last shot, the sniper, I was watching through binocs, 800 yards plus wind-moving target. 870, and he wasn't moving. Could have fooled me, looked impossible from here. Wasn't impossible, just difficult. He shook his head slowly. 23 confirmed kills in one day, with a rifle old enough to have serial numbers instead of QR codes. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. The rifle did its job. I just pointed it in the right direction. That's not how it works, and you know it. He paused. I need to say something. At the crash site, when I dismissed your warning about movement in the forest, that scout who died in the first burst that's on me, I should have listened. We all make calls, Vance. You made the best one you could with the information you had. But you had better information. Your instincts, your experience, he met her eyes. Won't make that mistake again. Next time you say you hear something, the whole team listens. That's a promise. It wasn't an apology exactly. It was something better, a commitment to trust earned through action, a recognition that rank and experience weren't always the same thing. Medics had swarmed the remaining casualties the moment the helicopter lifted off. The team dispersed to their various duties, exhausted but alive. Sienna headed for the armory, the rifle slung across her back, each step an effort of will. She was running on empty now. Adrenaline fully burned off, leaving only exhaustion and the 1,000 small pains that came from pushing a body past its limits. Dutch was waiting in the armory, his face carefully neutral. But she saw the relief in his eyes, the tension leaving his shoulders when he confirmed she was alive and whole. Heard you had a busy day. Heard right. She set the rifle on the workbench between them. Dutch picked it up with the reverence it deserved, checking it over, running his hands along the stock, inspecting the barrel. You ran it hard. Had to. Any malfunctions? None, not one. Fired clean every time. He nodded, unsurprised. That's what it was built for. What it was proven for. He looked at her. How many at 23 confirmed? Dutch's eyebrows rose slightly. 23. In one mission. The rifle earned its keep. The rifle did its job. You did the hard part. He set it down and pulled out his cleaning kit. But now it needs maintenance. You look like you could use some too. Sienna watched him begin the familiar ritual of disassembly cleaning inspection. His hands moved with the practiced ease of 40 years of doing the same task, the same motions, never cutting corners, never assuming. I need to tell you something, she said. Dutch paused, looked up. When Hastings ordered me to switch rifles, I almost did. Almost convinced myself that maybe he was right. Maybe I was being stubborn for the wrong reasons. But then I remembered what you taught me. About trusting the tool you know. About not fixing what isn't broken. And you were right. Every shot I made today I made because I knew exactly what this rifle would do. I knew how the trigger would break, how the recoil would feel, how the bullet would fly. That knowledge saved lives. Dutch resumed cleaning, running a patch through the barrel. Tools are tools, but the right tool in trained hands becomes something more, becomes an extension of intent. He paused. This rifle has history, my history in Grenada, now your history in these mountains. That matters, not because the past makes it magic, but because the past makes it known. She understood. The rifle wasn't special because it was old. It was special because it was proven. 15 years of service, countless rounds fired, and now 23 more enemy combatants who'd learned too late that age didn't mean obsolete. What happens now, she asked. Now you rest. Tomorrow you write your report. The day after, maybe you start breaking in one of those new rifles. Not to replace this one, but to have options. You think I should switch? I think you should master every tool available to you. This rifle will always be here, will always be reliable. But someday you might need what those new rifles offer. When that day comes, you should be ready. It was wisdom earned through decades offered without judgment. Sienna nodded. I'll start tomorrow. Good, but tonight this one gets the attention it deserves. She left him to his work and headed for the mess hall. The other soldiers she passed looked at her differently now. No more jokes about museum pieces, no more comments about antiques. They'd seen what the old rifle could do, and more importantly, they'd seen what she could do with it. The mess hall was serving dinner. She filled a tray with food she didn't taste, eating mechanically because her body needed fuel. Corporal Hayes sat down across from her, his young face serious. Lieutenant, can I ask you something? Go ahead. That rifle, how long did it take you to get that good with it? 9 years, and I'm still learning. 9 years. He said it like the number was incomprehensible. I've been shooting for 3 years and I thought I was pretty decent. You are decent. I saw you move under fire, saw you keep your head when things got bad. That's harder to teach than marksmanship. But I couldn't make the shots you made. Not yet, but you could. With time, with practice, with the right instruction. Hayes thought about that. Would you teach me, when we're back from deployment, when there's time? Sienna considered. She wasn't a formal instructor, didn't have the credentials or the assignment, but she remembered being 19 and eager, remembered Dutch taking the time to show her what she needed to know. Yeah, I'll teach you. The kid's face lit up. Thank you, ma'am. I won't waste your time. See that you don't. He left and she finished her meal in silence. The after-action review was scheduled for 1800 hours. She had an hour to prepare, to organize her thoughts, to put the chaos of combat into the structured language of military reporting. The AAR went as expected. Hastings asked questions, Vance provided answers, the team filled in details. They discussed what went right, what went wrong, what could be improved for next time. Garza's death was noted, documented. His family would be notified through proper channels. The helicopter crew's rescue was confirmed. They were at a field hospital receiving treatment and would make full recoveries. When it came to equipment, Hastings made a point of addressing the team directly. I want it noted for the record that Lieutenant Calloway's choice of weapon proved tactically sound and operationally superior to standard issue in the environmental conditions encountered. Her performance under fire was exceptional, and her judgment regarding personal equipment will be respected without question going forward. This applies to all personnel under my command. If you have legitimate reasons for equipment preferences based on proven performance, make your case. We'll evaluate on merit, not on what the manual says. It was as close to a public apology as regulations allowed, and more than that, it was a policy change. The team received the message clearly. The old rifle had been vindicated, and the principle behind it had been validated. After the AAR, as the soldiers dispersed, Vance pulled Sienna aside. The crew chief wanted to talk to you before they evacuated him. He left this. He handed her a piece of paper folded once. She opened it and read the handwritten message. Lieutenant Calloway, I've been flying in combat zones for 8 years, and I've never seen shooting like what you did today. 23 enemies. You didn't just save my life, you saved my crew, and you did it with a rifle older than most of the soldiers carrying me. That means something. Thank you doesn't cover it, but it's all I've got. Respectfully, CW2 Marcus Webb. She folded the note and put it in her pocket. Words on paper, but they carried weight. Recognition from someone who'd been there, who'd seen it, who understood the difference between theory and practice. She found herself walking back to the armory one more time. Dutch was still there, of course. The man seemed to live in this space surrounded by weapons and tools. Couldn't sleep, he asked. Not yet, wanted to check something. She pulled the rifle from its case again, bringing it to the light. The stock showed honest wear, the metal bore the patina of hard use. And there, barely visible in the worn wood, she could see the small marks Dutch had made during his time with it. Can I borrow your knife? Dutch handed over a folding blade without question. Sienna opened it and carefully carved a small mark into the stock just below Dutch's marks. 1 line for each confirmed kill. 23 lines neat and precise. When she finished, she handed the knife back. Dutch looked at the marks, running his finger over them gently. History, he said simply. History, she agreed. He smiled, rare and genuine. This weapon taught me patience in Grenada. Taught me that proven methods beat fancy innovation every time when conditions get hard. Now it's taught a whole new generation the same lesson. Through me. Through you, he confirmed. That's how real knowledge survives. Not through manuals or training videos. Through one professional teaching another, through experience passed down and proven again in new conditions. You've added your chapter to this rifle story. Someday you'll pass it on again. I'm not done with it yet. No, but when you are, you'll know. And you'll find someone worthy of it the way I found you. She returned the rifle to its case one last time for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new tests. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The rifle that everyone had mocked had proven itself beyond any remaining doubt. More importantly, she'd proven herself worthy of it. She headed for the barracks, her body demanding rest it had been denied for nearly 20 hours. This time when she lay down, sleep came fast and hard. She woke 6 hours later to someone shaking her shoulder. The specialist looked apologetic. Sorry to wake you, ma'am. Major wants to see you. Says it's important, but not urgent. She checked her watch. 600 hours. She'd slept through dinner, through the night, through everything. Her body had simply shut down and taken what it needed. Hastings was in his office looking like he hadn't slept at all. The map on his wall had new marks, new notations. The war continued whether individual soldiers rested or not. Lieutenant, sit. She sat still, shaking off the fog of deep sleep. I had a long conversation with Battalion Command last night. About you, about that rifle, about what happened yesterday. He paused. They want to feature you in a training video. Modern marksmanship techniques, equipment selection, that sort of thing. With respect, sir, I'd rather not. I told them you'd say that. He almost smiled. I also told them that the real lesson wasn't about one rifle or one sniper. It was about the difference between knowing your equipment and just carrying what you're issued. What did they say? They said I was getting philosophical in my old age, but they agreed to drop it. He leaned forward. The real reason I called you and Davis and the crew chief are going to make it. The surgeon said another hour and Davis would have lost a leg. The crew chief would have gone into shock and probably wouldn't have come back. You bought them that hour. Sienna nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The weight of responsibility was always there, but sometimes it lifted just enough to show that the burden had been worth carrying. There's one more thing. We recovered Garza's body this morning. He's on his way home. Hastings met her eyes. You kept your promise. No one gets left behind. That's the job, sir. That's the standard. Living up to it under fire is what separates the good units from the great ones. He stood. You're dismissed. Get some food. Get some real rest. I'll need you sharp for the next mission. She left his office and walked out into the morning. The firebase was coming alive around her soldiers, moving through their routines, the mechanical rhythm of a military installation at work. The sky had cleared during the night, and weak sunlight was trying to break through the clouds. She found herself at the armory again. Dutch looked up when she entered, unsurprised. Can't stay away, can you? Just wanted to see it one more time before I start working with the new rifles. He pulled the case from its storage location and set it on the bench. She opened it and looked at the rifle lying there. Metal and wood, simple mechanics, 15 years of proven service, and now 23 more marks on its history. You know what makes a tool legendary? Dutch asked. What? It's not age, it's not rarity. It's that moment when everyone said it wouldn't work and it did anyway. When all the new technology failed and the old reliable method came through. He tapped the rifle case. This had that moment yesterday. People will remember it. They'll tell the story. And every time some young soldier gets handed brand new gear and told it's better just because it's newer, someone will remember the day an old rifle outperformed everything modern because it was known, trusted, and mastered. Sienna ran her hand along the stock one last time, feeling the grain of the wood, the marks she'd carved, the history that had accumulated. I'll start learning the new systems tomorrow, she said. But this one stays primary until something proves itself better under fire. That's the right answer. Dutch closed the case. Now get out of my armory and get some breakfast. You look like hell. She smiled, a genuine expression that felt foreign after the intensity of the last day. Yes, Sergeant. As she walked toward the mess hall, she passed groups of soldiers who nodded respectfully, who made space for her, who looked at her with something that hadn't been there before. She'd earned more than vindication for her choice of rifle. She'd earned the kind of respect that couldn't be ordered or assigned, only proven through action. The 15-year-old rifle sat in its case in the armory, cleaned and ready, waiting for the next time it would be needed. It had started the mission mocked and dismissed. It ended as a legend with 23 marks carved into its stock and a story that would be told in briefing rooms and training ranges for years to come. Some tools didn't need improvement. They needed masters worthy of their proven reliability. And Sienna Calloway had proven beyond any shadow of doubt that she was exactly that kind of master. The snow had stopped, the sky was clearing, and somewhere in the mountains the war continued. But for one day, one mission, one soldier and her trusted rifle had shown that sometimes the old ways weren't just good enough. Sometimes they were exactly what was needed to bring everyone home.